This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
At Pepe Sayer, we focus on quality. So if someone comes into your restaurant and they see you're using Pepe Sayer, they know immediately that that is a quality product you've got in front of you on the table. And that comes from a decade of just doing quality butter day after day.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
To be honest, it all comes back to just being back in the kitchen and happy. My life's the kitchen. I love it. I don't know how to explain that to anybody else, but I think if you know people that I've worked with, they know if you're looking for me, you know where to find me. That's in the kitchen.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. We've seen the culinary synergies with Japanese and French cookery in some of our best restaurants like Tetsuya's and Sepia, to name a few. But outside the big cities, it's not that common. What does this precise and informed approach to cookery look like in a regional seaside town and in a small hotel too? David Tinker is the chef and owner of the Sandbar in Batemans Bay. David, how are you?
Good, thank you, Anthony. Thanks for having me on.
It's awesome to have you on the show. Batemans Bay is a fascinating place. It's like a go-to for so many holiday people, particularly from Canberra and north up in Sydney. What's it like at the moment?
Batemans Bay's pretty much the same as it's always been. It's home for me. It's always been there for me. We still have plenty of local support. Obviously, we've tried to do something pretty different in a small town, but tourism and the locals are like what really keeps us going.
Well, it really packs out as the temperature gets warmer. What's it like being a resident of Batemans Bay and seeing it swell in the warmer seasons?
You have to sort of go from feast to famine, really. You have to be ready to deal with that onslaught that comes with the peak seasons. But having a restaurant that sort of provides, well, for my family and for my staff, it really needs to be a year-round restaurant. Yeah. You can't really just bank on a big peak season to get you through. You really need to be there and support your locals and they support you and that's your lifeline.
Well, you're making a bit of a name for yourself there, and particularly chefs are sort of pointing towards what you're doing there, and I want to explore that in detail, but take us back to when you were young. What sort of role did food play in your family?
Okay, so food for me at an early age was all about family time. I grew up in a small village just on the outside of Batemans Bay. It's called South Durras, and my parents had moved there when I was very young, more or less to live the coastal life and enjoy nature and all that kind of thing. And to be honest, we didn't have much as a kid, but what we did have was the beach and the lake and family time. And my first interest sort of with cooking came from, my father was a boilermaker in the city and he couldn't stand it. And where we are in Durras, and he picked up some jobs, some work as a kitchen hand, and he used to come home and tell me all about how exciting the kitchen was and food and all that stuff, and we didn't really have much at home, but with what we had, we'd cook and we'd spend time together in the kitchen, and that's where I really got interested in food. It was more about like just spending that simple time with family at home. It was comforting, and with what little we had, actually, you could actually make something that was pretty exciting. And that's when I knew, like, from an early age, like the age of like 8 years old, I was saying to mum and dad, I'm going to be a chef. Like, oh, all right, is that what you really want to do? And then sort of from there, I remember one year my mother came home with a Larousse gastronomic, and Dad and I just used to go through it in the kitchen each afternoon, and we'd have a look at what we had, and we'd find something in there, and we'd just try and make something from that book with whatever we had. And yeah, that's how I got into it.
Wow, that's amazing. Is there any dish or sort of moment that you remember, like cooking out of that cookbook with your dad, that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I remember one of the first things we made was like coq au vin. And, you know, I'd never tried anything like that before, but, you know, it's classic French cookery, and, you know, yeah, just fell in love from the beginning.
Take us back to that sort of first time you started working in a commercial kitchen. Where did you get your sort of foot through the door?
A friend of my father's was a chef, and he knew I was keen to get into the kitchen. And I was in high school, like I was in year 8, and he'd opened a restaurant here in Batemans Bay, and they needed lots of staff and casuals and juniors and whatever. And my old man was like, oh, you know, there's the offer there. Do you want to go and have a look? And I was like, hell yeah. And from there, like this was when I was in year 8, I went in, and I used to do Thursday night after school, Friday night after school, and then I'd work all day Saturday, and then I'd work Sunday, and then it was back to school. And I was just like, I really just want to be in the kitchen. Like, I loved it. It's just where I wanted to be. And then from there, just sort of halfway through year 10, my parents sort of had a chat with me, and I said, like, obviously you love what you're doing. You know, have you really thought about it? And I said, you know, I want to be an apprentice chef. Obviously, I've already been doing it for a couple of years while I'm at school. And yeah, my parents had a chat, and we had a chat, and next minute I'm an apprentice and absolutely loving it. And then from there, I ended up in Bawley Plank Guest House, which was a little guest house. It's about 40 minutes from the bay. And I just got my tea, so I thought, oh, well, I can drive there. And I went and had a chat with them, and there was a French chef in the kitchen, and he had long grey hair, and he used to put feathers in his hair. He was real eccentric. And he was like, hey, do you want to give it a go? And I was like, yeah, you know, I couldn't believe the opportunity I had. And I remember the first day I walked in there, and he goes, oh, that's the oven. And it was a wood-fired oven. Like, that's all they had. And he goes, your first job's to cut kindling. And I'm just like, and it wasn't just like, I don't know, like you see fire in kitchens now, it's a bit of a fad, but like back then it was like your first job's to chop the wood and get the oven going, because that's the oven. and yeah, I spent a couple of years there, which I really enjoyed. But I knew if I wanted to sort of move on in my career, the next step was head for the big smoke. So I just wrote a letter to a few top restaurants in Sydney, and one day the phone rang and my mum answered it, and she's lip read to me, Serge Danserou's on the fucking phone. I was like, oh dear, here we go. So got on the phone, and next minute my old man made me get dressed up in a suit and take an empty briefcase to apply for this job at Bathers Pavilion. And we had a chat, and he offered me a job. He said, you'll have to start on breakfast, you know, at the bottom of the run in the cafe. And I couldn't wait, so I found myself an apartment to live, and packed up, moved out of home, off I went. Yeah.
What was it like for you at that age, having grown up, on the south coast of New South Wales and now in Sydney and in such an inspirational restaurant as well? What was it like for you?
It was scary as hell, but I wanted to be there. I just really wanted to be there. And then once I got into the kitchen, I thought, there's no way you can tell these guys you've been chopping wood in Bawley Point. But I just put my head down and got accepted by the team, because obviously if you're keen and you turn up with a smile on your face and ready to do some hard work, the boys will back you up and you become part of the team, and once you're part of the team you can grow from there. That place is that was the ultimate training ground really for me, coming from here, going in there. It's all there. It's brand new. You've got a pastry kitchen, you've got the restaurant on the other side, which I ended up being sous chef in the restaurant after my time. It was awesome. Like, my eyes were just wide open. I couldn't believe I was in this environment. I just felt so lucky, and I just wanted to do the best that I could.
Take us back into that kitchen. You spent quite a bit of time there. Do you have any stories of, the influence it had on you and what you took from those experiences? Yeah.
I just remember being on the breakfast and sort of finishing my breakfast chef and the prep, and I just didn't want to go home. I just loved being there, and I just used to, when I'd finished and I was ready for the next day and it was time to sort of pack up and get out of there, I'd go and hassle the chef de parties that were on the pans doing lunch and dinner to see if they needed any prep for the next day. And of course they had a list as long as their arm, and they were like, well, you sure you don't want to go home? You got breakfast in the morning. I was like, no, I'd prefer to stay. So they just give me more work to do. And then one day towards the end of breakfast, I packed everything up and I started to get ready for the next day. And one of the boys, Tomo, he just turned around and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm getting ready for tomorrow. He said, no, you're not. You're calling the pans for lunch. I was like, righto. And that was it. I never went back to breakfast. And then I was dropping pans in the cafe with the big boys. I was still a commie, like just after my apprenticeship. And I was lucky enough to get a shot at one of the chef de parties roles on the pans. And then same thing, I did that for a few months. And one day Phil just came up to me and said, you've had the call up from Top Gun, Maverick. You're going into the restaurant. And I was like, all right. I can't wait, but I was terrified. And walked into there, and I turned around and there was no one else on the section at the end of the kitchen. And I knew that was the fish section, even though I'd never worked there. And the chef de cuisine said, you're on the fish tonight. And same story. Here we go again. And then 12 months later, I was getting promoted to sous chef of the restaurant when it had 2 hats, and I'd only just turned 20 years old. It was unreal. I don't think I've ever had that sort of experience in my life.
Well, Serge and Bathers had such a huge impact on the dining landscape in Sydney. What was so special about it for you?
For me, just being in Sydney, working in a restaurant with that reputation, and just, coming from down here, self-pride, satisfaction. I really loved to be there. And I didn't really notice at the time, but Serge really looked after me and mentored me and gave me a lot of opportunities that a lot of others didn't get. It was so exciting.
Where did your time at Bathers come to an end, and where did it lead to?
So I'd spent 4 years there, and obviously I just had a want to go off and really learn more of my trade. And, I'd heard stories of what London was like, and that really sounded like the place that I wanted to check it out. And I got there and I thought, oh, I didn't really know where I wanted to go. And I picked up a Michelin guide and I read about Sketch and Pierre Gagnaire. And I just remember the second line that said Master Chef Pierre Gagnaire, and it said technical wizardry. And I just thought to myself, oh, geez, that sounds exactly what you'd travel to the other side of the world for. So, and then it had a number to make a reservation, and I just thought, you know what, give it a shot. I just rang that number and they answered, and I said, can I speak to the chef? And they said, yeah. And they put me, and can you hold for a second? And they put me through to the kitchen, and I just said, look, I'm Dave. I've got a working holiday visa. I've just arrived. Can I do a trial? And the chef said, be here tomorrow morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
How different was the kitchen there compared to what you were used to?
Well, a lot bigger again. Same really high standard, big team. But then with the food, when Gagnaire gets in there and lets loose, it's a pretty hectic environment. Everything's changing all the time. He's one of those guys that when he's in the kitchen, no two plates go out the same. He's constantly changing things. He's always pushing himself to get more from the food. It's just incredible. Like, they call him the jazz man, and you can sort of get that understanding. Like, everyone's like, they're playing the same song, but he just goes off on this little venture on his own, and he stays in tune, but it's just, he's constantly changing things, and yeah, it's just incredible to see the way that he works. He's not one of those chefs that sit in the office. He's never on the pass. He's just always on the stoves, on the section. He's like the world's craziest chef de party. Yeah.
Well, Pierre Gagnaire's influence is incredible. What sort of impact did he have on your thoughts about your own cookery and the path that you took from there?
Well, he sort of gives you the tools and the freedom not to be afraid and not to try new things, and, you know, to respect tradition, but he's always looking for that emotion, that excitement, and like a free spirit. And yeah. I think if there's anything that you'd want to get from working from Pierre Gagnaire is that the spirit and the freedom, and not being afraid to try and taste and do new things.
What happened after your time there? Was it long before you came back to Australia?
I came back to Australia because towards the end of my time there, I'd met my wife who's Japanese, and she was pregnant at the time, so we both thought starting a family in London would be pretty difficult, and that's what we really wanted to do. So I said, let's go back to Batemans Bay if you'd like to. And she said yeah, and we came back home, and we had our first child, and I had a job, which after working with all that time with Serge Danserou and Pierre Gagnaire, that was kind of really, really exciting, and I enjoyed it, and it was kind of everything to me in my heart and soul. That was, you know, having wanted to be in the kitchen as a kid. And then I came back and, well, like I said, I had a job, but I kind of felt like I was flipping steaks for a salary or something. I wasn't happy inside, and then I did that for a couple of years actually, and I didn't notice. I didn't notice what was happening, but inside, I was devastated. I had a wife, I had a child, and my wife was pregnant with our second one along the way. But I had this huge hole in my stomach which wasn't going to go anywhere. And after a while, my wife just said to me one day, look, I want you to go and talk to somebody. And I did. And I went, and this is kind of how Sandbar sort of came about. It was about me being happy to do what I'm doing and support for my family. And I just remember I spoke to a doctor, and then he said, I don't want you to go anywhere. I want you to go straight and talk to him at the Batemans Bay Hospital. And I went and had a chat there. I'm talking to them, and then from there it went to, we want you to do a video conference to a specialist, and I went there. And then it went from that to the white coat came back and said, I'm sorry to do this to you, but I need to take away your civil rights to basically be here for you. You need help. And from there, there was a lot of tears. And I had to go for a couple of months and stay in... I had to stay in a mental health hospital, where you walk in and they take your shoelaces and you're locked up, but they're there for you. They're there to help you. So I did that and spent a few months, and I had to be on medication and all that kind of stuff. And then once it was time to, I'd spent a lot of time with them, and we just talked about cooking and all that kind of stuff. And I think they made me realise that it's still there. You don't need to be, or you can heal from this. And I came back home, and I didn't jump straight back into the kitchen. I had a bit of time off, and I was walking down the street, and a friend of mine said to me, "What are you doing?" And I was thinking of you the other day. There's this motel down on Beach Road. It's getting renovated. It's got a kitchen in there. Why don't you go and have a chat with the owners, because they didn't really sound too interested in doing a restaurant. So I came and had a chat, and he asked me where I've been and what I'd done, and actually he was really interested. And he said, look, if I had a thought you were knocking on the door asking me to cater for a motel, I would have said, don't bother, you won't make it. And he said, but what you're talking about sounds pretty interesting. I think if you try something different in a small community, which isn't really happening yet, you might just make it if you're willing enough to have a go. And I was like, hell yeah. And he gave me 6 months rent-free to have a crack at doing, this kind of Japanese, French-inspired restaurant, which really was all about me being happy doing the food that I loved again. I had my wife who's Japanese. I was so interested in her side, the Japanese cuisine. I'd always worked with the French chefs. I knew I loved it. So I thought this sounded right for me. It sounded like everything that I love, plus a kitchen, plus a restaurant, and I can have a go on my own. Even though I'm in Batemans Bay, I can try and make a restaurant that I really love and provide for my family and make it my home. And that's really what Sandbar is to me.
Mental health issues in the industry are very common, but it takes a lot for someone to take the steps that you took to sort of find help. What sort of advice would you have for someone that, might have some issues but needs some help to walk through the door like you did?
Just talk, just listen. It's okay to be upset, I guess, or have that sort of hole in your stomach. You soon realise there's there's so many people there to help you that you don't even know they exist. Like, as soon as you open your mouth and they think that you're in any kind of trouble, there's so many people that are there to help you and just welcome it. And you never know, like, when you come out of it, you're in a better place. Instead of going off on your own and maybe just letting it stew inside your stomach or whatever, you just, open up. Don't be afraid. Don't feel embarrassed. I think it took me 4 years to say anything. But as soon as I did, I found myself in a world of people that are only there to listen and help. And then from there, opportunities just came that I didn't know existed.
I'm fascinated by what you've created with the Japanese and French technique. You had that really solid foundation with French cookery and that love and interest with Japanese cuisine. Take us on a journey of working with those two different cuisines and what it was like for you.
So for me, Japanese, French is like, I never really wanted it to be a fusion sort of experiment. For me, I sort of really saw it as a way to work seasonally, use a lot more fruit and vegetables, and it kind of made French cuisine for me a lot lighter. It's kind of like the lighter version of French cuisine to me.
Tell us about producers of the region and your approach with your food. Is there a dish or two that sort of exemplifies your approach that you can tell us about?
There's plenty of local producers. There's some unique things that a lot of people sort of weren't really using when I first started. That's like local sea urchin. I loved the sea urchin, and I got involved in that. And from there, I thought, because I'm doing a tasting menu, you can't really just be strong-headed and say, we're going to do this, like it or not. You still need to please, or try and please, as many of your guests as you can with, obviously there's no choice involved. So I thought, how can I use sea urchin, but in a creative way and in a way that maybe most people can approach it? So it was around Christmas time I decided to do a sea urchin and plum sake ice cream, but use that as a first course, as a savoury for the restaurant. And that was really exciting because it was different. It was Japanese, but French. And a lot of the guests, some of them didn't really say, or some of them were, that sea urchin wasn't their first go-to, but they'd eat sea urchin ice cream, but as a savoury in the restaurant, and then they'd come and tell you how much they like it. So, that for me, that was fun.
What's been some of the really surprising things about creating, such a high level of offering for a regional town that it hadn't had before? What surprised you about the journey so far of the Sandbar?
I was really surprised that it sort of took off the way it did, because it was pretty out there and I wasn't doing the norm, and you don't really think, are people going to take sort of this idea, how they're going to take it? You don't really know what to expect, but because it was that opportunity in my life where it was have a go on your own now and do it to you're in the kitchen because you love it and do what you love, and then all of a sudden you've got a restaurant full of people in a small town like Batemans Bay lining up for, Crazy David Tinker's Japanese French tasting menu, and to this day, we still laugh, and my dad must too.
You've reignited your passion with the Sandbar. How does it make you feel when you're in the kitchen and cooking for guests?
Oh, I absolutely love it. And the fact that, like, when I started, it was just my wife and I. And that was another reason why I thought I could do a tasting menu too, because there was no way I was going to try and do a la carte on my own. So I could set myself up and I'd have a chance on my own of doing a set menu. But now, you know, I've got full-time employees, which is great. So it gives me more room to move and try new things, more help. And just to see it as a little business that doesn't just provide for my family anymore, it's, it provides for so many more too.
Well, you're creating something pretty special in regional Australia, and really gone out on a whim and put your heart on your sleeve, and it's showing with amazing sort of feedback and interest. What do you love about what you do?
To be honest, it all comes back to just being back in the kitchen and happy. My life's the kitchen. I love it. I don't know how to explain that to anybody else, but I think if you know people that I've worked with, they know if you're looking for me, you know where to find me. That's in the kitchen, because that's where I love to be. Doing a restaurant and all that kind of stuff, it wasn't really the dream, but the dream is for me to be able to do what I do and be happy and try new things and provide for my family. That's what it is, yeah.
Well, David, congratulations on what you and your wife have built in Batemans Bay there, the Sandbar. It's been an absolute honour to have you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear your story. Please keep in touch and we'll catch up again soon.
Oh, thank you very much, Anthony.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.